Professor Gérard Prunier with us this afternoon. You can see his extensive biography on the notice that went out. He has been a prolific writer and researcher in the area of Sudan, Rwanda, Darfur for many, many years. He has published a great deal on these topics. Professor Prunier is also a member of ASMIA's Academic Council and is also on the editorial board of our journal. His latest book is entitled The Country That Does Not Exist, History of Somaliland, that came out in 2021. Given all the recent turmoil that's happening in Sudan, we thought that Gérard would be the best person to unpack what's going on these days and present it to us. So, Gérard, it's really a great pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. The virtual floor is now yours. So go ahead.
The question is, what is really happening behind what is happening? Because for the events, I'm not a journalist and I'm not presently in Khartoum or in Janina. The question is, what is this mess all about? Because just describing the events is just, people shooting each other in the streets. The question is, why do they do that? And the idea that it is just the ambitions of two competitive generals, one of whom is not a general at all, but so-called generals, is not sufficient. This is not two crazies at each other's throats, although it is in the end. But why? Do they have some kind of special reason? Actually, they do. And this is what is usually not discussed in newspaper articles. The question is, how did it start? And the question is not who pulled the trigger first in order to say this one is good, this one is bad, because I remember many years ago discussing at the seminar, it was on the Rwandese genocide, and a colleague of mine called Philippe Rentiens was there. He's a professor at the University of Antwerp. And, he was describing the reality of what had happened. And then Americans are like clear-cut visions. So somebody stopped him and said, well, but who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And his answer were, they're only bad guys. I think it's a little bit the same thing in the present situation, except that what is lying behind the actions is completely different. It's got nothing to do whatsoever with the Rwandese genocide. But the question of good guys and bad guys is not a very interesting one, because there I would have to agree with Philip when he was talking about Rwanda. They're only bad guys. Question is not very interesting. We're not into a philosophical moral course. We're into an attempt at geopolitical appraising. And usually what filters in the media are usually the roles of outsiders. The Egyptians on one side, the United Arab Emirates, the Americans, the Russians. Well, frankly, none of those are the cause of what is happening. The fact that they do meddle in the present situation, yes, of course. When you have something unexpected like that blows up, it is likely that the parties which are involved in the previous situation tend at least to try to do something that makes sense from the point of view that they see. But I'm not sure that even that is very clear, because, for example, the Egyptians contradicted themselves completely. The CIA just let filter about, 10 days ago, the attempt by the Egyptians to sell ammunition to Mr. Putin, which was rather unexpected. given the excellent relationship between the Egyptian government and the U.S. This was rather, and since the CIA probably had a person who was planted in the audience when this was discussed, the Sisi himself said, "We're going to try to do that, but it should not filter out because otherwise the Americans will be mad at us," which I think could be expected. But probably this was the CIA way to sort of pick things from the ground and prevent things from happening, just to make it public. I don't know if that enabled Mr. Sisi to detect who was reporting on his secret meetings to Washington, but there was somebody, obviously. And now we have a little bit the same problem, because the question is also, are the Egyptians actually helping physically, militarily, the so-called regular army in the Sudan, that is Mr. General Burhan, or are they sort of on standby? Frankly, I don't really know. But this is not, again, what is the cause. Whatever the Egyptians are doing, whatever the Americans are doing behind the Egyptians is not the cause of what is happening. Basically, if you want to see the cause, it goes back to 2019, when President Bashir was overthrown by a duumvirate of Mr. Burhan and Mr. Hemeti, who are now trying to kill each other. So how did we go from a position where they both agreed on the removal of Bashir to the point where they are trying to kill each other? This depends on the politics of the Islamist political tendency in Sudanese politics, I would say, over the last 30 years. Because Bashir did not take power on June 30th, 1989, like a lot of people still write. It was a kind of grouping of people where Bashir was one member, but the leader was Hassan al-Turabi, who was not a military person. And it's sort of interesting that Hassan al-Turabi, who was the man who actually ran the coup, later was ditched, kicked out by his own movement. Hassan al-Turabi was the man who carried out the coup. Bashir was his, how would I say, armed tool, the military tool, and who eventually the military tool kicked out the boss, who was a civilian and who was a real Islamist. And it's sort of interesting. This is a document that very few people have seen so far. Hassan al-Turabi, before he died, decided to tell the truth about all what had happened, and it was recorded. The only condition that he put to the recording of what was the truth about the Islamist coup of June 30th, 1989, was that the truth would not be divulgated till after he died. And now this is circulating in among some political groups in the Sudan and a little bit outside. Basically, the movement had completely degenerated, or degenerated later when the military took over within the Islamist movement. And the fact is that Mr. Hemeti is not an Islamist. He was just a new military tool when Bashir was getting old, had been too long in power, and was looking for fresh reinforcements. And he made a huge mistake in taking somebody who is not what you would call in Sudanese Arabic, Awlad al-Beled, the children of the land, or Aulad al-Bahr, the children of the river, and to take somebody who is basically, by his origins, an enemy, or let's say a mercenary at the service of the central command of the political power in Khartoum. And this is a situation which is, how would I say, a major mistake. This reminds me of the Roman emperors who, in the last days of the Roman Empire, took as mercenaries German tribesmen. Eventually, the German tribesmen decided to go on their own, and this was the end of the Roman Empire. When Bashir made the mistake of taking somebody who was a Rizaigat Arab from Darfur, and using one Rizaigat clan against another, because he was using Maria against Muhammad. And, this is low level manipulation of slaves, basically. This is how the people of the Nile Valley see it. Except when you play at toy soldiers with slaves, the problem is that they might decide exactly what happened in the Roman Empire to go on their own and do what they want, and not what their masters want. So in a way, it was when the coup occurred in 2019, it was a desperate attempt by the Islamist movement to eliminate Bashir, who was considered to be a terrible person, especially by the international community, especially by the United States, to eliminate him and replace him by fresh material, including the mercenaries that had just been recruited 3 years before. And the thing didn't work. They had actually a second coup inside the first coup in October 2021, because actually they felt that the popular movement, the democratic popular movement in the Sudan, was very strongly trying to assert itself, because they believed that they had carried out a revolution by eliminating the Islamists. And increasingly, they realized that this was not the case. So there was a coup done by the two gentlemen who are now at each other's throats to try to keep things under their control. Except one was basically an ally of the Islamists, and that is the legitimate head of the army. And the other one was just a mercenary that they had hired. So at first, they worked together. That was October 2021. And then slowly, they realized that this was not going to last. And it was interesting because everybody is saying, who fired the first shot? The answer is both. It's OK Corral reconducted. And because Burhan knew that somehow Hemeti would not be kept under control, that the slave would revolt. And he carried out a campaign of recruitment, including in Darfur, against members of the same tribe as Hemeti, Rizaigat, except from the other side, another clan, the Mohammed, of Musa Hilal. So Hemeti was faced with being undercut by people of his own tribe. And so he started doing exactly the opposite, bringing troops to Khartoum. So Burhan knew that, this was the end, that some blow up would. So actually, who shot first? This is an open question, which is not very interesting, because they knew that they had come to the end of the road and that their collaboration had ended. So now we can see the end.
what are the interests of various external parties, in particular the UAE, in Sudanese affairs in the first place? Is it a function of Islamist politics at large, or are there more specific concerns? And there have been stories, true or not, about in the current crisis, Russian involvement via the Wagner Group. And I was wondering if you could comment on these two aspects.
These two aspects are basically true, but they're not, let's say, I would say causative. They're adjacent trajectories that blend or mix or add themselves to the situation, but they didn't cause the situation. The situation is internal. It is, a tragic evolution of Sudanese politics ever since, I would say, Sadiq al-Mahdi was overthrown in 1989. And this is, first, the rise to power of the Islamist movement, and second, their total failure at handling power once they had it. Yes, the United Arab Emirates, basically, let's say they're playing toy soldiers. It's a little bit like the same as in Libya. Basically, their partner is the same, the Libyan general Khalifa Haftar. It's basically anti-Islamist. At the same time, they find themselves on the same side as the Russians, who are not. The United Arab Emirates have been rather tolerant in the European civil war that is now developing since February 2022. But they are not a major player either. They're just adjacent. Same for the Egyptians, who are in a total upheaval and total contradiction, because they support General Burhan, who is the ally of the Islamists. If you look at the trajectory, political trajectory of Marshal Sisi, he got to power by eliminating the Islamists, and he's still fighting them everywhere where he can. So this is a bad case of walking on your head, and that doesn't mean that it's not the case. Everybody is walking on his head, but it is not a logical. I'm a member of the old school of rationalists who try to get logical deductions from primary causes. Right now, no. This is, I would say this is the Putin era. Crazy people do crazy things and sort of try to dress them up in the clothes of rationality.
Thank you, Dr. Prunier. So we have a couple of questions that are coming in through the Q&A from people attending this webinar. The first one I'm going to read to you is from ESMIA member Steve Onyewu, and he asks, do you think the Sudanese crisis confirms the notion that African dictators are a stabilizing force in African politics? We have seen Egypt, Libya, Somalia, Uganda, the DRC, and now Sudan implode after the removal of long-term dictators. What do you think about this hypothesis?
Not much, because the various situations are completely different. For example, let's take Somalia, which I know fairly well. The president of the Somali government has been elected democratically. Now he controls about 20% of the territory of Somalia. So is he a dictator? And if he's a dictator over what? Because, first of all, you have two nation states now that are independent, Somaliland and Puntland. And within the so-called Somalia, which has the seat in the UN in New York, you have, in fact, 5 different units that are quite different from each other and have their own governments. So the government in Mogadishu is reigning over 20% of the country, ruling over 20% of the country. Now you have similar situations in, for example, in the Congo. The present president, Mr. Tshisekedi, has not been elected. He has been forced into presidency by the former dictator, Mr. Kabila. And in fact, he has turned into a rather democratic, not dictator, but forced elected candidate. You know, I mean, he did not have the majority of the votes, but the previous dictator had fielded a rival candidate who had even less votes. So he managed to convince the army to back up Mr. Tshisekedi because he thought Mr. Tshisekedi was stupid. There was no problem, he would manipulate him. That was not the case. Mr. Tshisekedi revealed himself not to be stupid and not to be manipulated. So if this is a dictatorship and now they're running for an election which should take place, I believe, in August. And, you know, this is not the continuing of a dictatorship. It's the transformation, strangely enough, of a man who was a manipulated pseudo candidate into a genuine candidate for the next election, which is going to take place. And I doubt that Mr. Kabila, unless he carries out a coup, if he has the capacity to do that with the army, can stop that. Because Mr. Tshisekedi is likely to be re-elected, but this time not because of some manipulation, but in reality, and so forth and so on. As for Uganda, I don't think this is something new because Mr. Museveni took power in 1986. He's still around, so you know, and there was no coup in between. You know, he manipulated elections like so many other dictators on earth. So that is not particularly African, because otherwise Mr. Kim Il-sung or Mr. Xi Jinping might be Africans. We didn't realize. But, you know, this is the problem of dictatorship versus democracy. And it's not a particularly African problem. You know, Mr. Putin, as far as I know, with his fantastic election results, is not an African. And he's behaving exactly like the most violent of African presidents actually would think twice about doing. So no, frankly, I don't think that this situation you know, in Sudan, and you know, and there is no dictator. There was a two-headed quasi-dictatorship, and actually the two-headed are now biting each other. But this is not the reconduction of any dictatorship through any other mean.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question here that what are the prospects for mediation as a vehicle to return to a transition to civilian rule? Who is best placed to lead mediation?
Who is excuse me, the place, or
Which individual or individuals is best placed to lead a mediation between?
well, individuals, I don't know, but I know that already this comedy of errors taking place in Saudi Arabia right now is not going to get anywhere. For one thing, some of the outside players, you know, neither Egypt nor the United Arab Emirates are present, and the Americans are very low key, are almost invisible. The Saudi, we don't know which way they really would like to lead things, and of course they have a strong influence on you know, This is because both of the fighters in Sudan think that they can actually sway the Saudis. In my opinion, none of them can. And right now, the prospect of a negotiated peace is close to zero.
Okay, this is a slightly related question, so I'm going to throw this one out at you. Someone wrote in, being Ethiopia and Eritrea are neighbors to the Sudan and interest groups of the current crisis. Do the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments have any role either to exasperate the crisis or help to settle it?
I don't think they had any role. If there was an exasperation, I mean, it was, I wouldn't call the word exasperation because it's too strong. There was a kind of a bad smell or sideways influence from Isaias Afewerki in trying to insert himself into the complicated and unmanageable Sudan situation. Actually, he didn't succeed. I know that some of my friends are afraid that if Hemeti won, Isaias Afewerki would gain some kind of influence inside the Sudan. Frankly, I doubt it, because he has not been able to manage the end of the Ethiopian civil war, which is still simmering. You know, there is very little media coverage, but the Ethiopian civil war is now switched from a situation where it was the central government fighting the Tigrayans to a situation where two allies of the, or at least one ally and one supposed ally of the central government are fighting each other. The Amhara and the Oromo. The Oromo, I mean, a certain section of the Oromo Liberation Army. They are supposed to be discussing things in Zanzibar right now, but the result of their peace talks is about as productive as the peace talks in the Sudan, I mean, in Saudi Arabia about the Sudan. So, no, I don't think, I would not put any responsibility for the situation in Sudan on the influence, bad influence. I mean, of course, there was no good influence, that's for sure, but there was very little bad influence. I mean, the Ethiopians and the Eritreans have so many problems with their own situation. You know, this is mass killings of 600,000 people over the last 2.5 years. And, you know, when you look at, you know, the newspapers and the TV, you know, whether it's, you know, you're American, so I will use images that speak to you, whether it is CNN or Fox News, I don't think anybody cares. You know, I'm using, you know, two political antagonists in the United States, but there is one thing they have in common: total disregard for what is happening in the Horn of Africa.
If you think that Egypt's position is dictated by their concern to see another division of the country by a seceding of Darfur, is that why they are backing the central government despite their political differences?
This is half true. This is definitely not wrong, but why only half true? Because the main reason for the Egyptians to back a man who is a close ally of the Islamist movement in the Sudan, it cannot be simply ascribed to a fear of Darfur secession. And, you know, there you have to realize one thing: Egypt, when it was not Egypt and is an independent country, but a part of the Turkish Empire, created the Sudan. What we call today the Sudan was created in 1821 by the invasion of Ottomans. I'm sorry to use this obsolete word, but it is the only correct one. These were not Egyptians, and these were not Turks. I mean, Muhammad Ali, who was the Sultan of Egypt at the time, was an Albanian from whatever now is an Albanian independent country, which I don't think is recognized in southern Yugoslavia. But he came to power in Egypt after the French evacuated, after Bonaparte evacuated, and he tried to negotiate a margin of independence from the Ottomans, from Turkey, from the Ottoman Empire. And in order to do that, the Ottoman Sultan asked him for black soldiers, because there was the notion that since they were fighting against the Wahhabi in Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia didn't exist, but there was this Wahhabi movement, and the Turks were fighting it. They kept fighting it actually till World War One, and they had a bizarre notion that race had something to do, and that black soldiers would be able more to tolerate the terrible temperatures in Arabia. So they asked Muhammad Ali for black soldiers. Of course, Muhammad Ali didn't have any black soldiers, so he conquered the Sudan to get black soldiers as slaves and send them as military slaves to the Turks. So this started a very strange relationship between Egypt and the Sudan, because most states in Africa, the notion is they were colonized by Europeans, and the notion became true when in 1898 the British came, but they came there because simply they had conquered Egypt, and they felt in a way, the behavior of the British was a little bit like this Mr. Putin today with the Ukraine. I cannot keep the top without keeping the bottom at the same time. So if I'm in Egypt, I cannot tolerate the Mahdist movement in the Sudan, because one time or another, they are going to undermine us. And so the British did not conquer the Sudan because they were interested in the Sudan. They conquered it simply as a pedestal, as a base for their power in Egypt. And in a way, you could say that today, Mr. Sisi is in a similar position. He wants to make sure that he controls the Sudan, at least indirectly, the way he was controlling it under Nimeri, and he couldn't really control. I mean, of course, it was not Mr. Sisi, but the Egyptian, it was Mubarak at the time. But that Cairo, let's say, Cairo would control the Sudan. And that is right in the question of the person who put that. The fear is not so much a secession of Darfur, because the total spite for Kul al-Abid min al-Darfur, to all the slaves from Darfur, the racism of the Egyptians is very strong. And of course, they have no respect whatsoever for the people in Darfur. So the notion that Darfur could actually be a threat, no, not really. But they don't want, actually, their position is very similar to that of the British in the late 19th century. If I'm in Cairo, I have to have a strong base, a good chair on which to sit, under me. And the chair of Egypt is the Sudan. So I have to control the situation in the Sudan. And of course, Hemeti is a dangerous newcomer coming from a despised auxiliary mercenary group. So I would much rather be in line with General Burhan, who is a Shayghiya Arab, who are traditionally the men who do the job for Cairo. Whoever is in Cairo, whether it's Mr. Sisi or the British 100 years, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, the geopolitical situation has remained the same.
Do you see this conflict spreading into South Sudan and or destabilizing the Great Lakes area? Secondly, and related, could the Sudan conflict worsen the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC?
This is a good question when you're worried about Africa falling apart completely. But although I'm a hardline realist, I don't think that this is a prominent, important, immediate fear, not even for South Sudan. I mean, the problems in South Sudan are between the Dinka, the Shilluk, and the Nuer. And, not, and actually, it's quite interesting to see that in terms of refugees, the people who are refugees now in northern Sudan are, of course, so-called Arabs. If we want to take these ethnic terms at face value, but there were a lot of southern Sudanese who are now terrified by this civil war among their former overlords, and they're running where? To South Sudan. So I don't think this is something that is going to destabilize anything. I mean, South Sudan is so destabilized permanently that I don't think, there, you cannot see, for example, this is not the Dinka migration, like a Nuer or Shilluk migration. No, it's just anybody who is abd, a slave, from the south, is running away. And he's going to, I mean, basically, this was one of the reasons why there was this long war to try to create a southern Sudanese state. So, it's almost like you could say the picture of Israel after World War II. Let's go to where we're safe. So it's not, yes, you could say, well, Israel destabilized the Middle East, but that was involuntary. Their main cause was running away from Europe. And there is the same thing. The Southern Sudanese are going to Southern Sudan to run away from Northern Sudan. And now, if we talk about things as far as Uganda, Rwanda, and the Congo, no, it will have no impact on these distant regions. We're not yet at this point. If we come to that point, it would be a little bit like Mr. Putin's army would go through Poland and come into Germany. It's not a total impossibility, but it's rather unlikely. And so Mr. Hemeti and Mr. Burhan, I don't see them sending shock waves that would reach all the way to Lake Victoria.
All right, we have a question here. How has the African Union done enough to de-escalate violence in the Sudan? What more do you think the organization should do to bring an end to the conflict?
Well, actually, as usual, the African Union is completely impotent. They didn't do anything. They can't do anything. They won't do anything. The African Union is kind of something, a nice sculpture on the top of the table. But what could they have done? I mean, frankly, now I'm being sarcastic, and unfortunately, it's right. But let's take it the other way around. If they had to do something, what would it have been done? To disarm the Sudanese army? To disarm Mr. Hemeti? With what force? With what military capacity? There is no united African army to. Let's try to see something which is a little bit similar. Their effort at trying to do something to prevent Mr. Kagame to support another invasion of the Congo with M23 group in the Ituri. They have tried, and the people, strangely enough, who had been at the forefront of that have been the Kenyans, and the Angolans have promised 500 soldiers. They never gave them because they know that they would be back to in 1986 and 1996. Sorry, and frankly, okay, the African Union is useless. But is it their fault? What could they do? Apart from declarations, kalam fadi, as we say in Sudanese Arabic, empty words, empty talk. Honestly, I don't see what the African Union could have done. They didn't do anything, but would they have been able to do anything? I don't think so.
The question here is, Sudan exploited the Tigray crisis of Ethiopia that costed over 1 million human lives and annexed an extensive land of Ethiopia. There is an allegation that the incumbent Oromo-led government of Ethiopia is intentionally observing when the Ethiopian sovereignty is infringed because it wants to weaken the power of Amhara. Given this allegation, do you think the Ethiopian government is not involving to work with one of the contested parties of the Sudan? What will be the best way to prevail peace in East Africa?
There is no way to prevail peace in East Africa. Otherwise, if you have a recipe for that, you might have one also for the Ukraine and the relationship. These are situations that not every problem has a solution. And I would not agree with the figure of 1 million deaths in the Tigrayan war. It was pretty horrible. There were perhaps over 500,000, which I think is already a very, very sizable massacre. If we had seen such a violent war anywhere else than in Africa, it would have been all over the newspapers. There, it was not. Now, if the Oromo and the Amhara are disagreeing with each other in their support for Mr. Abiy, which seems to be the case, not all the Oromo with all the Amhara, as usual, there is seldom 100% position in one direction or in the other. But let's say a lot of Oromo are now being considered as enemies, or consider the Amhara as enemies, because they consider that, through Mr. Abiy, they hope with their victory over the Tigrayans to come back to power and go back to, let's say, Haile Selassie period, where the Amhara ruled the country. I don't think right now this has much of a relevance for the situation in Africa at large, or East Africa, or even only the Horn. If we narrow our focus on smaller space, I don't think the Ethiopians can do anything. They can also do Kalam Fadi, just as the African Union. But I don't think they're very preoccupied by that. I think they're more preoccupied by their own situation, and the talks that are taking place in Zanzibar between the government and the Oromo Liberation Army are totally ineffectual. So these peace prospects, I think, are more in the domain of wishful thinking than of actual possibilities.
I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us today and really unpacking a lot of what's happening and debunking a lot of the issues that we're seeing and hearing in the media, as well as your own perspective and your own research. We get to see you in person at some point in Washington, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.